My name is Frank Warren, and this story begins with a betrayal no parent should ever face. On the morning of my wife's funeral, my only son told me, "Dad, you can't bring Mom back, but Sam only turns 32 once." Those words burned deeper than any wound I've known. But what came after shocked me even more. The very next day, he walked into my kitchen, not with remorse, not with flowers for his mother's grave, but with a demand for money as if nothing had happened. That was the moment I realized the man I'd raised no longer saw me as a father, but as a bank account. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more stories like this one. The last time I heard my wife's laugh, it came from the hallway after dinner. A soft chuckle as she reached to switch off the lamp. That sound still clung to the walls when I buried her 3 days later. But my son Brad wasn't there. Instead, he had chosen to host a birthday party for his wife Sam, complete with DJ's helium balloons and a cake that cost more than the casket we lowered into the ground. The humiliation wasn't just mine, it was hers. The absence of her only child cut through the ceremony sharper than the Iowa wind that tore at our coats. I had called him the night before, pressing the phone so tightly to my ear that the static hissed like a reprimand. "Brad, the funeral's at 11:30. I'll save you a seat up front." I tried to keep my voice even the way Helen used to, when she wanted to make a hard request sound gentle. He cleared his throat, and over the line came the heavy bass of party music warming up. "Dad, I told you yesterday. Sam's birthday is tonight. We've got caterers, a DJ, the whole setup. You can't bring Mom back, but Sam only turns 32 once. You understand, right?" Understand. I stood in my kitchen with the program spread across the counter. Bradley Warren, pallbearer. His name printed neat black ink on white paper. With a pen, I drew one slow line through it. The click of the cap sounded like the closing of a door I knew I'd never open again. At the graveside, the wind cut through my jacket like it had an opinion. 23 people gathered, neighbors, church friends, Helen's fellow nurses, all looking for my son. My sister-in-law, Patricia, leaned close and whispered, "Where's Brad?" Her voice carried hope, as if maybe he would appear at the last moment, stepping out from the trees, contrite and ready to shoulder the coffin. "He had other commitments," I said, tasting the words like iron. Mrs. Henderson from across the street patted my arm, her hand smelling faintly of lilac. "She was always so proud of that boy," she said, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't nod in agreement. That night I sat in Helen's chair, the brown leather one she teased me for buying on clearance. Across the room, our wedding photo stared back, she in her grandmother's lace dress, looking at me like time itself was a rumor. And all I could think was that the boy she had loved, the man I had tried to raise, had chosen a party over this day. Over her. Over us. When neighbors asked me the next week why Brad wasn't at the service, I told them the truth. He had better plans. That answer earned me silence, the kind that makes people look at their shoes. But I preferred that silence to pity. Because humiliation doesn't come only from strangers, it comes loudest from the ones who share your blood. So when the phone rang the very next morning, Brad's voice breezy as if nothing had happened, I already knew something inside me had shifted. It was 9:06 a.m., the morning after Helen's funeral, when the phone lit up again. For a moment I thought about letting it ring. I even heard Helen's voice in my head, steady, patient. "Answer your son, Franklin." So I did. "Hey, Dad." Brad said, his voice too cheerful for the day after we laid his mother in the ground. "How are you holding up?" I was silent for a breath too long, then answered, "I'm here." "Good, good," he said, as if checking a box. Then he cleared his throat. "So listen. Small hiccup. Sam's birthday party last night. Incredible. But with the upgrades, the liquor package food truck at midnight, we went a little over. He chuckled as if this was all some harmless joke. Anyway, we're sitting at about 145 on the card. Need to clear it before the statement drops. Could you wire me today just to stay ahead? For a second, I thought I'd misheard. My wife's body was still warm in the earth, and my son was asking me to pay off his party tab. There is a version of me that existed until this morning, I said finally. A version that thought, he's my boy, it's not worth fighting over. A version that believed disappointment was just a tax you paid for a lovely life. I looked at Helen's picture on the mantel. That version is gone. What do you mean? Brad's tone shifted brittle. I mean, no, I said. The line went quiet except for the faint sound of glass set down too hard. Then came his incredulous laugh. No, Dad, is your bank having trouble? You can afford it. This isn't a big deal. I'm not giving you any more money. His voice climbed higher. You're seriously doing this now? After the week we've had, in the background. I heard Sam's sharp voice cut in something about deposits for Cabo. Brad muffled the receiver, but not enough. Then he snapped back, you're being cold. Mom wouldn't, your mother wanted you at her funeral? I interrupted, steady but not loud. That stopped him cold. He tried to backpedal, but the damage was done. I hung up before he found new words. The phone felt lighter in my hand than it had in years, the way a hammer does when you finally use it for the right purpose. After decades of yes, I had finally said no. And the air in the house changed, still heavy with grief, but cleaner somehow. I went into my office, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the folders I had kept all these years. Brad's tuition, Brad's house, Brad's wedding, Brad's cars. Each labeled neatly, each thick with checks that once carried the memo line, family helps family. I laid them out across the desk paper, honest in its silence. 4 years of college. A down payment that could have bought Helen a new kitchen. A wedding that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. Vacations, emergencies, business rescues. The total didn't scare me. The pattern did. I realized then that the problem wasn't the money. It was the exchange rate between help and respect. And we were underwater. I capped the last folder and leaned back, hearing Helen's voice again. Don't let him drown you while he learns to swim. For the first time, I was ready to let him feel the water. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your ribs instead of soothing them. I sat in Helen's leather chair, staring at the crack in the ceiling. She used to joke, looked like a skinny dog running. She'd laugh, brush her hair back, and threaten to paint over it. She never did. Now it stared down at me like a reminder some flaws are permanent if you choose to leave them. I thought about Brad's voice that morning, how casual it sounded, when he asked me to pay off a party bill. His mother's funeral had been yesterday. How does a man justify that to himself? I tried to picture the boy he used to be, the one who'd ride his bike down Morrison Park with skinned knees and ask me to watch him jump the curb. Somewhere between that boy and the man on the phone, something had gone terribly wrong. I stood, went to the office, and opened the drawer with his name stamped across so many files. The weight of those folders was heavier than cinder blocks. Emergency fund, car lease, wedding expenses, down payments. Each time I had told myself it was just one more bridge to get him across to adulthood. But bridges don't work if the man refuses to walk, if he sets up camp in the middle and demands tolls from the one who built it. I sat at the desk and pulled out a yellow legal pad, 2 columns. On the left, I wrote family. On the right, business. Under family, I listed every bailout, every transfer, every loan that was never meant to be paid back. Under business, I listed every favor I had granted him at Warren Construction. Client meetings he skipped, expense accounts that ballooned, promotions he hadn't earned but still collected salaries for. By the time I set down my pen, the page was full lines crowded together until they nearly blurred. Seeing it all laid out side by side stripped me of any illusions. This wasn't about generosity anymore. It was about boundaries I had let erode until they no longer existed. Helen used to say I got very still before making big decisions. She called it a gift. I now realized it was a warning. I sat there very still, staring at that paper, until the truth settled into my bones. Helping Brad wasn't saving him. It was burying him alive under favors he never earned. I poured a cup of coffee I didn't drink, just to let the smell sit in the air. It reminded me of her late nights on the night shift, walking in with tired eyes, and that faint smile that said she still chose us no matter the weight she carried. She had believed Brad would find his footing. But I could see clearly now he wasn't looking for ground. He was looking for a net. That morning when the sun finally broke through the blinds, I made a promise out loud to the empty house. No more nets. Not for Brad. Not again. The morning sun spilled across Helen's porcelain cup by the sink, the faint lipstick ring catching the light. I left it untouched, the same way I'd left it since she passed. It reminded me that some marks are meant to stay, not scrubbed away. Brad's absence from the funeral was another mark, one I couldn't wash off, no matter how many excuses I'd made for him in the past. Later that day, I drove past the bakery where Sam always ordered cakes that cost as much as truck tires. Through the fogged window, I saw someone had traced a heart in the condensation. My hands tightened on the wheel. I imagined Brad and Sam inside laughing, celebrating, while Helen lay in the ground without her son present. I almost turned in, almost stormed through the doors, almost demanded he look me in the eye and explain. But I didn't. Anger alone wouldn't change him. He needed something stronger, consequences. At home, I hung my coat on the hook Helen had leveled herself years ago. The house exhaled its familiar creaks and groans, and I listened like a man hearing a language he once knew well. On the mantel, our wedding photo showed Helen at 23, eyes full of belief in me, in us, in the family we would raise. I thought about how she defended Brad even during chemo, whispering, "He's busy with work," when I knew he was out buying champagne for Sam's boutique events. I pulled the funeral program from my pocket. Brad's name still had a line through it. I didn't tear the page. I didn't throw it away. Instead, I slid it into a plastic sleeve and filed it under estate. Not out of spite, out of record. Paper doesn't lie. And I wanted proof, not for him, not for the lawyers I might need one day, but for me. A man who builds houses knows that what you write down becomes real. As evening fell, Patricia, my sister-in-law, stopped by with a casserole. She hugged me, studied the hallway, as if Helen might still appear carrying laundry. She whispered, "I kept expecting Brad at the graveside." Her voice was kind, but her eyes carried judgment. I answered evenly, he had other plans. She didn't argue. She just nodded, the kind of nod that admits a truth you don't want to say out loud. After she left, I sat alone in the silence and felt something shift inside me. For decades, I'd run two systems business which ran on contracts and accountability, and family which ran on forgiveness and hope. Brad had learned to game the second system, believing love meant immunity. That night, I decided it was time to merge them. No more exceptions, no more blurred lines. I walked into Helen's study, pulled out the boxes labeled in her neat handwriting, Christmas lights, Brad's school, Kyle's art. Inside one, I found an index card she had written years ago. We gave him everything we had. I hope he remembers us kindly. My chest tightened. I loved my son, but love didn't mean letting him write the ending. That card told me what Helen feared. My job now was to make sure her fear didn't come true. The phone buzzed again that afternoon, a text from Sam this time. "We're dropping by at 4. Need to discuss something important." No please, no question mark. My first instinct was to delete it. But then I thought of Helen's words, the ones she wrote in the margins of her recipe book. Don't let love pay his bills. If they wanted to come, let them. I would be ready. At 4:28, their white SUV pulled into the driveway, tires crunching on gravel a little too fast. Sam got out first, sunglasses the size of half her face, scanning my house like it was a showroom. Brad followed, tugging at the sleeves of the jacket I'd bought him for a Chamber of Commerce luncheon years back. They didn't knock. They walked in with the confidence of people who assume doors will always be open. Dad Brad said, his voice rehearsed, polite on the surface, but already carrying the rhythm of a request. "We need to talk." I gestured to the kitchen table. He sat. Sam stayed standing, arms crossed, gaze flicking over the cabinets, as if she were measuring for a remodel. We overextended a little with Sam's party. Brad began, fingers interlaced, like a man making a confession he didn't mean. "It was a milestone, you know. We just need 20 to clear the cards and have a cushion." 20,000, I repeated, my voice flat. "Yes," he said quickly, eyes darting to Sam for reinforcement. She cut in before I could respond. "It's not just that. We're planning a reset trip to Cabo. I need to recharge, and Brad promised me it would happen. It's important for us. Important." The word echoed in my chest, sour and heavy. Yesterday, burying his mother wasn't important. Today, Cabo was. I leaned back in my chair, let the silence stretch. They expected an argument, a lecture, maybe even reluctant agreement. Instead, I gave them a single word. "No." Sam scoffed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said again, but this time looking only at Brad. His mouth opened and closed like a man who'd just discovered the lock on a door he'd always found open. "You can afford it," he said finally, the words small, almost pathetic. "Yes," I replied, "I can, but I won't." He shifted, searching for leverage. "Mom would," I raised a hand. His sentence died. "Your mother wanted you at her funeral," I said quietly. That was the only truth that mattered. Sam placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes sharp. "If you cut him off, don't expect us to come around anymore." "I understand," I said, the phrase clean in my mouth. For years I'd bitten back words, swallowed excuses. But this was clarity. I stood. "Thank you for stopping by." Brad stared at me, waiting for me to soften. I didn't. Eventually, he rose, scanned the kitchen like he was trying to memorize what he was walking away from, and left with his wife. The SUV backed out, its cracked windshield catching the light like a wink from fate. When the house was quiet again, I walked to my office. I opened my notebook and wrote 3 names: Michael Grant, attorney; Linda Moore, secretary; bank officer, pending. Underneath I wrote review estate, review company, review will. It wasn't revenge I was planning. It was balance. The next morning I sat across from Michael Grant in his mahogany-paneled office, the Cedar Falls skyline gray behind him. Michael had been our lawyer for more than 20 years. He handled Helen's will, the incorporation of Warren Construction, even quiet legal favors that came with a handshake and a cup of diner coffee. He knew me well enough to skip pleasantries. "What's on your mind, Frank?" he asked, folding his hands. "I need to make changes," I said. "To the will, to the estate, to everything." Michael leaned back. "What scope are we talking?" I reached into my briefcase, the leather one Helen had given me on our 10th anniversary, and slid a folder across the desk. "Scope is removing Brad. Entirely. No inheritance. No access. No decision-making authority." Michael studied me. That's not something you undo easily. Are you sure this isn't grief talking? It isn't grief, I said, my voice steady. It's pattern. A pattern I've allowed too long. I told him about the funeral, about Brad's absence, about the phone call the next morning where he asked me to cover a $145,000 party bill as if it were nothing. I laid out the years of rescues, the emergency checks, the endless bridges I built for a man who never wanted to cross them. Michael listened, his jaw tightening when I mentioned Helen defending Brad even during chemo. When I finished, he nodded slowly. All right, we draft a new will. Who's the beneficiary? The Helen Warren Foundation, I said. My throat tightened at the words, but I didn't stop. Scholarships for underprivileged kids, cancer research, community projects, something that bears her name and not his. Michael scribbled notes. We'll also change the designations on life insurance retirement accounts, payable on death bank accounts. Those override the will if untouched. I handed him a handwritten list. I want it airtight. He nodded. We'll document your mental capacity, too. If Brad tries to contest, the court will see you were clear-headed. That's fine, I said. Do whatever you need. For the first time in days, I felt the ground shift beneath me, not from loss, but from resolve. When I got home, I walked straight into my office. Helen's reading glasses were still on her paperback, smudged from the last chapter she never finished. I set Michael's draft papers beside them. Paper tells the truth if you let it, and the truth was simple. Brad had written himself out of my estate the moment he skipped his mother's funeral. That night I sat with a sandwich at the kitchen counter and stared at the garden Helen once tended. Empty soil rows waiting. She used to say a garden doesn't lie, you get out what you put in. Brad's life was a neglected garden propped up with store-bought flowers. My job now was to stop pretending it was thriving. The first shovel of dirt had been turned, and for once it wasn't to build something for Brad. It was to build something against him. 2 days later, I walked into the conference room at Warren Construction with a folder under my arm and a plan in my chest. The river outside the glass walls was frozen sunlight bouncing sharp off its surface. My employees, men and women who had carried this company through storms and lean years, sat around the long table. And at the far end, slouched in his chair with a smirk he'd inherited from no one but himself, was Brad. "Morning, Dad," he said loud enough for the room to hear. "Ready to talk big picture?" I set my briefcase on the table and met his grin with something colder. "That's exactly what we're here to do." The projector hummed as I began the presentation. Slide after slide showed numbers, completion rates, client retention cost, overruns. Every metric pointed to decline. I watched Brad lean back, fingers laced behind his head, a picture of confidence. "We all know Q4 is rough," he interrupted with a chuckle. "Weather delays, supply chain issues," I raised my hand. The room stilled. Weather didn't cause you to miss the Denton Group meeting. Supply chain didn't rack up a $1 $200 steakhouse tab under networking. And supply chain didn't book a 2-night suite in Des Moines, where we don't have a single project within 100 miles. The smirk drained from his face. A ripple went through the room, quiet but sharp enough to cut. "This isn't the time or place," he began. "This is exactly the time and place," I said, my voice low but firm. "Because this company is not an ATM. It is not a playground for someone who happens to share my last name." I slid the document across the table toward him. His eyes flicked down, then back up at me. Effective immediately, his title changed from Vice President of Operations to Special Projects Liaison. He would report directly to me. All expenditures required written approval. "You can't do this," he whispered, though the words barely carried. "I can," I replied. and I just did. Silence filled the room. Not the heavy kind of grief, but the clean silence of a room recalibrating. My managers glanced at one another, understanding that the storm cloud hovering over the company for years had finally broken. The meeting resumed. I went through the rest of the agenda contracts, scheduling new bids, while Brad sat stiff, his hands clamped together, like he could hold on to authority by force of will. When it ended, he left without a word, the door swinging shut behind him. Later that afternoon, Linda Moore stepped into my office. "He's pacing in the parking lot," she said softly. "Let him pace," I replied. "He'll need the practice." That evening, I poured a finger of the single malt Helen had given me on our 25th anniversary. I didn't drink much anymore, but tonight felt different. Not celebration, not revenge, structure. The first beam had been set, the first nail driven. Brad thought the world still bent around him, but now for the first time in his life, it bent back. The next week, I invited a few close colleagues and family friends to dinner at my house. It wasn't a celebration. It was a statement. The dining table Helen had chosen years ago was polished, set with simple china, no flowers, no fuss. Among the guests were Linda Moore, my secretary of 12 years, Michael Grant, my attorney, and two men who had stood with me through countless projects. And of course, Brad and Sam. Sam arrived in a dress that probably cost more than one of my trucks. Brad followed close, his smile fixed but hollow. They thought this was their stage. Halfway through the main course, I tapped my glass. "I have an announcement," I said, my voice calm. Brad leaned forward, eyes lit like a boy waiting for a new bike. "I'm starting a foundation," I continued. "The Helen Warren Foundation. Its mission will be scholarships for underprivileged kids, community projects, cancer research. Her name deserves more than stone and silence." Guests nodded, voices murmuring support. Brad grinned wide, sensing opportunity. "That's great, Dad. We could use my contacts for fundraising. I can help with outreach, maybe even sit on the board." I shook my head gently. Board seats are reserved for those with a proven record of stewardship and responsibility. You've got potential, Brad, but right now your focus should remain on your special projects at the company. The grin cracked. Just enough for me to see the irritation behind it. Sam's eyes narrowed, and for a second I saw the calculation, what this meant for their future, for her lifestyle. She masked it quickly with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. After dessert, Linda helped me in the kitchen. Her voice was low. "He's not happy." "He doesn't have to be," I replied, rinsing a plate. "He just has to be out of the way." That night I sat in my office, papers spread out in front of me. Michael had already begun the transfers, shares in certain properties, portions of equipment leases, even art Helen and I collected over the years. Each asset moved into the foundation was a wall, brick by brick, sealing Brad out of what he thought was his inheritance. Every signature, Michael had reminded me, is a brick in the wall between you and a lawsuit. Good, I thought. I'm building it higher every day. Brad didn't know it yet, but the ground under his feet was already shifting. He still strutted into the office each morning, still bragged to anyone who would listen about big plans, still lived in a house filled with furniture he hadn't paid for. He thought the family system of forgiveness still protected him. What he didn't see was that the business system, my system, was now in play. The Helen Warren Foundation wasn't just charity. It was my fortress, and I intended to make it impenetrable. 2 weeks later, Brad showed up at my office unannounced. Linda gave me a warning glance through the glass before he barged in, dropping into the chair across from my desk like he still owned the place. So he began adjusting his cufflinks, I've been thinking. The foundation. The board. You can't launch something that big without me. I'm family. I let his words hang in the air, then slid a folder across the desk. Inside were expense reports, receipts from high-end restaurants, hotel stays in Des Moines, and networking events that didn't exist on our calendar. Linda had documented them meticulously for months. "What's this?" he asked, his smile faltering. "Your record," I said simply. "If your last name weren't Warren, you'd have been fired months ago. This company doesn't operate on last names anymore. It operates on accountability." Color rose in his cheeks. "You're humiliating me." "No, Brad. You did that yourself. I'm just putting it on paper." I leaned back, folding my hands. "Effective immediately, your authority in this company is suspended. You'll handle only special projects assignments. I choose nothing more." His voice cracked. "You can't demote me like some hourly employee. I've worked here for years." "You've drawn a salary," I corrected. "Work is something else entirely." For a moment, I thought he might lunge across the desk. Instead, he pushed back from the chair, stood stiffly, and muttered, "This isn't over." He stormed out the door, rattling in its frame. I sat for a long while after he left, staring at the folder. Each line item was a nail in the coffin of his credibility, but it wasn't anger that held me steady. It was clarity. For decades, I had blurred the lines between family and business. That day, I redrew them in permanent ink. Later that evening, Michael Grant stopped by my house. He carried a stack of papers, legal drafts for the foundation. Over coffee, we reviewed each clause. Assets were shifting: the lake cabin, the rental properties, even company shares. Each document placed another wall between Brad and the life he thought was waiting for him. "Every transfer," Michael said, "is another lock on the door. He can knock all he wants, but without the keys, he's just a man on the porch." I nodded. "Good. Let him knock." After he left, I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen window, staring out at Helen's garden. The beds were empty now, only dark soil and the rusted spade against the fence. She used to tell me that a garden tells the truth. You can't fake growth. You can buy flowers to cover the soil, but without roots, they wilt. Brad's life had been nothing but store-bought blooms. Now, for the first time, I was letting him see the dirt. The quarterly board meeting came on a brittle winter morning, the kind where sunlight looks clean from a distance but cuts cold when it hits your skin. I arrived early, carrying a briefcase heavier with intention than with paper. By the time I entered the conference room, most of the department heads were seated. At the far end of the table, Brad lounged with his phone thumb scrolling confidence plastered across his face like a mask. "Morning, Dad," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Ready to talk vision, I took the head seat and opened the meeting. Slide by slide, I walked the board through the numbers: declining project completions, missed deadlines, client complaints. My managers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Everyone knew the problems. Nobody had seen them laid out in one brutal sequence. When I advanced to the slide titled Department Performance, Brad leaned back, laced his fingers behind his head, and smirked. "We all know fourth quarter is rough. Weather delays, supply chain issues." I cut him off with a single raised hand. Weather didn't miss the Denton Group meeting. Supply chain didn't run up a $1,200 tab at Porter Steakhouse. And neither one booked a hotel suite in Des Moines while projects sat unfinished. The smirk collapsed. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that makes you aware of your breathing. "This company is not a family ATM," I continued, voice calm but carrying. "It is not a playground for someone who happens to share my last name." I slid a document across the table. Effective immediately, Brad was stripped of his role as Vice President of Operations. His new title, Special Projects Liaison. All spending required my approval. His authority in the company was reduced to a sandbox with no toys. "You can't do this in front of everyone," he muttered, his face red, then pale. "I can," I said evenly. and I just did. The rest of the meeting moved forward on schedule, though the tension never left the room. When it adjourned, Brad stood stiffly, his jaw tight, and stormed out without a word. Later, Linda appeared in my doorway. "He's out in the parking lot pacing," she said. "Let him pace," I replied. "He's going to need the practice." That evening, I sat at Helen's desk, the lamplight soft against her old notes and glasses. For years, I had blurred family and business until the lines vanished. But today, I had drawn a bold one in front of witnesses. Brad could rage, posture, or scheme, but the record was no longer his to rewrite. I poured a glass of water, set it beside the stack of signed documents, and whispered to the empty room, "This is for you, Helen." And for me, the first strike had landed not out of anger, but out of necessity. And Brad had no idea it was only the beginning. Brad stayed quiet for a week. Too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't mean retreat, it means regrouping. I'd seen that look in contractors before, men who lost a bid but weren't done scheming. They don't lick their wounds. They sharpen their knives. One morning, Linda stepped into my office with a thin folder. "You'll want to see this," she said. Inside were notes on Brad's new side project, an LLC he had quietly registered, a shell company, with his name buried beneath layers of generic titles. He'd been sniffing around the warehouse auction, talking big about buying up used equipment, claiming he was about to launch something independent. I didn't stop him. I let him believe he had outsmarted me. The auction was held in our warehouse on a cold Thursday morning. Rows of heavy machinery stood lined up, iron giants coated in dust and grease. Brad strutted in with Sam on his arm, dressed like they were attending a gala rather than an industrial sale. His swagger was nauseating, but it told me everything he thought today was his resurrection. When the bidding started, Brad raised his paddle high, his voice confident. 25 grand. Contractors shot him looks sharp enough to cut steel. He outbid them again and again, stacking up 3 machines in less than 20 minutes. By the time the final gavel fell, he grinned wide, chest puffed out like he'd just conquered an empire. He marched straight over to me, waving his paperwork. "See, Dad? I told you I was investing in my future. You should be proud." I nodded slowly, as if humoring him. "Let's get the paperwork sorted." What he didn't know was that every title had already been transferred to the Helen Warren Foundation. His LLC might have signed the bids, but the legal ownership was never his. He had paid for access, not possession. Short-term leases binding him tighter than chains. 2 days later, Michael Grant summoned Brad to his office. When Brad stormed into my house that evening, his face crimson with rage, he slapped the papers onto my kitchen counter. "What the hell is this?" he shouted. "I bought those machines." "No," I said calmly, pouring myself a glass of water. "You leased them, from the foundation. Terms are clear. You tricked me," he bellowed. I met his eyes and spoke evenly. "I gave you exactly what you bid for access. Ownership was never on the table." Sam crossed her arms, her voice sharp as a knife. "You're cutting us out of everything. I'm making sure you can't burn down what your mother and I built," I said. "That's not cutting you out. That's protecting the house from fire." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Brad's hands trembled against the papers. Sam's glare could have cracked glass. They stormed out without another word, the slam of the door echoing through the house. I leaned back in Helen's chair, the papers still on the counter. My son thought he'd played his first winning move. He didn't realize he'd just tightened his own leash. The first snow of the season had just started to fall when Sam made her next move. A letter arrived from a realtor. I didn't know, a glossy envelope with my address typed neatly on the front. Inside was a sales packet, comparable listings, projected values. and a polite note about showing my home in the coming month. My home. The place Helen and I built nail by nail over 32 years. I called the number at the bottom. "There's been a mistake," I said. "This house isn't for sale." The agent hesitated. "Sir, your son and his wife told us otherwise. They said you'd agreed to list it. We've already lined up prospective buyers." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. 10 minutes later, headlights swept across my driveway. Brad and Sam climbed out, moving quickly through the cold. They didn't knock, just walked in like it was still theirs. "We need to talk about the house," Sam announced, arms folded tight. "What about it?" I asked, leaning against the counter. Brad's tone was falsely calm, like he was explaining something to a stubborn child. "We already told the realtor we'd be ready to show it next month. The market's hot, Dad. We'll split the profit fairly. It'll help us reset." Fair. That word tasted like rust. I walked to my office, pulled open the bottom drawer, and retrieved a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a quitclaim deed, Brad's signature on it, dated 8 years back, right before Helen's surgery, when we'd reorganized our finances to prepare for the unknown. She had signed as witness. Legally, the house had been mine alone ever since. I placed the paper on the table. "You can't sell something that isn't yours." Brad's eyes scanned the document, then widened. His breathing hitched. You kept this." "Yes," I said. "The house belongs to me, always has." Sam's face hardened, her voice sharp. "This is manipulation. You're twisting the law to cut your own son out of his inheritance." "No," I corrected, my voice steady. "This is me protecting what your mother and I built." Brad signed away his claim years ago. He might have forgotten, but paper doesn't forget. Brad looked from me to Sam, then back to the deed. For a moment I saw not a grown man, but a boy caught cheating on a test, realizing the teacher had the answer key. His shoulders slumped, then stiffened with anger. "This isn't fair," he muttered. "The truth rarely is," I said. Sam slammed her hand against the counter. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. We'll fight you in court." "Do what you think you should," I replied. They stormed out, their SUV fishtailing slightly as it backed into the street. I watched from the window until the taillights disappeared into the snow. Then I folded the quitclaim deed, carefully slid it back into its sleeve, and locked it in the cabinet. It wasn't just a document. It was a weapon. And I had no intention of leaving it unused. The letter came a week later, hand-delivered by a courier in a navy suit who wouldn't meet my eyes. Inside was a crisp document embossed with the name of a law firm downtown. "We represent Bradley and Samantha Warren in the matter of disputed property ownership." I read it twice slowly, then set it on Helen's desk beside her reading glasses. The irony stung. She used to solve mysteries in paperbacks, guessing the ending before the author revealed it. This time she wouldn't need to guess. Our son had made himself the villain. I didn't call Brad. I didn't call Sam. Instead, I called someone else, Diane Corbett. She'd been Helen's friend, first walking partner, book club ally, and one of the sharpest real estate attorneys in the county. Diane didn't waste time with sympathy. She asked for the facts I gave them, and by the end of the conversation she said, "Frank, they don't have a case. That quitclaim deed kills any joint interest. But if you want to end this, really end it, we can do more than defend. We can close the door." Within a week, Diane drafted a living trust. The house, my remaining savings, even the small cabin by the lake, all of it moved into the trust, with one explicit clause: Brad was excluded. Not reduced, excluded. "You're sure about this?" she asked as I signed the papers. "I'm sure," I said. Helen was sure too. "I'm just putting it in writing." Brad didn't take the news quietly. He showed up at my door 2 days later, Sam at his side. He didn't knock, he hammered loud enough to shake the pictures on the wall. "You can't do this," he shouted the moment I opened the door. His face was flushed, his hair uncombed like he'd been pacing for hours. "You cut me out of everything. Everything Mom wanted for me." I stepped aside. "Come in. Let's talk." They entered but didn't sit. Sam spoke first, her voice a blade. "You're abusing your power. You're using legal tricks to rob your own son." "No," I said, calm. "I'm protecting what your mother and I built. Brad had chances. He signed away his claim years ago. He may have forgotten. The law didn't." Brad's voice cracked. "This isn't fair. You're choosing paperwork over family." I met his eyes. Family shows up at funerals. Family doesn't send their father a bill for a birthday party the morning after their mother is buried. You made your choice. I'm making mine. Sam's jaw tightened. "This isn't over." "I know," I said. They left quietly this time, no slamming doors. Just silence, and silence is heavier. I watched from the window as they walked to their SUV. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at what they couldn't touch. When the house was still again, I went to Helen's study and set the signed trust papers on her desk. My hand rested on the cover of her cloth-bound notebook. She used to write prayers in it. Tonight I added one of my own, "Lord, don't let me leave him worse by giving too much." It wasn't vengeance I felt. It was relief. For the first time, the law was on my side and it had teeth. Foreclosure doesn't announce itself with drama. It seeps in through paperwork, late notices, phone calls delivered in tones too formal to mistake for courtesy. My part in it was simple. I withdrew my guarantee on Brad's Maple Ridge mortgage. Without that safety net, the bank's patience snapped like a dry board. The call came from David Harrison at First Iowa Bank. His voice was measured careful, the way men talk when they know bad news is already in the room. "Mr. Warren, we need to inform you the Maple Ridge loan is 60 days delinquent. Since you've withdrawn as guarantor, foreclosure proceedings will begin if the balance isn't brought current." I said only 4 words. Do what you must. News travels fast in a town like Cedar Falls. Within days, whispers spread through the diner, the country club, the pro shop. People didn't say it outright, but they knew. The son who had skipped his mother's funeral for a birthday party was about to lose his house. No conspiracy, just social arithmetic. People weigh what matters, and Brad didn't. At Romanos, the restaurant Sam loved to be seen in, the hostess suddenly couldn't find their reservation. At the yoga studio where Sam posed for Instagram captions about gratitude, they told her memberships were at capacity. Whispers at the country club turned into averted eyes when Brad arrived for his Friday foursome. He thought he could reinvent the narrative, telling former clients he was starting his own firm. By the second call, word of his demotion at Warren Construction had already preceded him. By the third, he wasn't pitching, he was begging for scraps. The auction date was set for a Thursday morning at the courthouse. I didn't tell anyone I planned to be there. I parked across the street in a spot where I could see the steps, but not be seen clearly. Frost clung to the stone like a warning. Brad and Sam arrived late, dressed as if clothes alone could change the truth. He wore his good coat, the one reserved for weddings and interviews. She wore white with a fur collar, chin lifted like dignity could be stitched into fabric. They stood close but not touching. The county clerk read the legal description of the house lot numbers and offsets that reduced their home to bullet points. The opening bid came at $280,000. A contractor pushed it up. Another followed. Brad didn't raise his paddle. He just scanned the crowd like a man hoping to spot a lifeline. Then a woman in a navy suit, Diane's associate, stepped forward with perfect timing. 312, she said firmly. One more round of bids followed, but her voice cut them down with precision. 317, she said. Going once. Going twice. Sold. Brad turned, scanning the crowd. For a split second, his eyes locked on mine through the windshield of my truck. He didn't need me to say a word. He already knew. When the gavel fell, I leaned back in my seat. This wasn't revenge. It was gravity. A house built on borrowed money and entitlement had finally collapsed under its own weight. When the gavel fell, the courthouse square exhaled. Contractors shuffled away, murmuring. A few curiosity seekers lingered, waiting for drama that wouldn't come. But I didn't move. I sat in my truck watching Brad at the bottom of those courthouse steps, like a man waiting for a verdict that had already been read. Sam stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes sharp, her white coat defiant against the cold. I stepped out only when the crowd had thinned. My shoes clicked against the frost-bitten stone. Brad's eyes met mine, wild but hollow. "You're proud of yourself, aren't you?" he spat. "No," I said evenly. "I'm done carrying the pride for both of us." Sam snapped, her voice pitched high enough to draw echoes off the stone. "This is theft. You can't just—" "The bank," I interrupted, nodding toward the clerk gathering papers. And they did. "No one profits here. Not me, not the foundation. The balance is settled. That's all." Her glare could have cut glass. "We'll sue. You'll see." "Do what you think you should," I replied. Brad said nothing. His jaw worked, but words refused to come. He turned and walked down the steps, each stride slower than the last, like the weight of his own failures pressed on his shoulders. Sam followed her heels, striking sharp against the stone, as if punishing the ground itself. Inside, Linda and Diane finished the paperwork with the efficiency of people who lived in contracts, not emotions. When Diane handed me the final folder, she said, "Title's clean. Riverbend Holdings under the foundation owns it now. Ironclad." I nodded, sliding the folder under my arm. "Thank you." That night I walked through the empty rooms of the Maple Ridge house. The place smelled of dust and neglect, but the bones were strong. Helen and I had chosen the crown molding together, argued over the paint color, laughed about the creak in the upstairs floorboard that never quite went away. Now the silence inside was different. It was waiting. I pictured a family moving in here one day, children's laughter echoing where arguments had soured the air. That was the future I wanted, not a monument to entitlement, but a shelter for someone who knew its worth. Back home, I poured a glass of water and sat at Helen's desk. Her notebook lay open to a page I hadn't read in months. The ink had faded slightly, but her words still carried weight. "Pride is fine. Legacy is better." Brad had mistaken pride for entitlement. He thought legacy was something handed down no matter how poorly he carried himself. But legacy isn't inherited. It's earned brick by brick, choice by choice. Tonight I had locked away his inheritance, not out of spite, but to prove that truth. I set my pen to paper and wrote a single line in my own hand. The ledger is balanced for now. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. Not because the battle was over, but because the battlefield was mine again. The courthouse auction was just the beginning. By the time the dust settled, Brad had stopped calling. Not because he'd accepted defeat, because he was regrouping. I knew that silence well, but I also knew something else. If I spent all my days waiting for his next strike, I'd lose myself. And I'd lose Helen all over again. That's when I turned my focus to the foundation. It had started as 3 words scrawled on a yellow legal pad, Helen Warren Foundation. But with Michael's guidance and Diane's sharp eye for the law, it became something sturdier than grief. Assets moved into it piece by piece, the lake cabin, the art Helen had collected, on our travels a share of company holdings. Each transfer was like pouring concrete into a mold, setting the shape of a future Brad couldn't touch. Linda handled the logistics with her usual efficiency, drawing up minutes for the first board meeting, cataloging donations, even designing the stationery with Helen's name in clean serif letters. When she placed the first letterhead draft on my desk, I stared at it for a long time. There it was, in black and white, Helen's name, not just remembered, but working. The board came together in early spring. Michael sat with his legal pad, Diane with her sharp pencil, Linda with her organized files. I left one seat empty, not because I intended to fill it, but because Helen deserved a place in the room. We voted on the first initiative scholarships for underprivileged kids, grants for community projects, a pilot program for families of cancer patients at the hospital where Helen had worked. It felt right. It felt like her. Meanwhile, Brad began showing up at the office less and less. Special projects liaison turned out to be a sandbox with no toys. Linda documented his absences, carefully missed meetings, blank reports, requests for expenses that never made sense. He was circling the drain, but instead of reaching for a rope, he dug deeper into excuses. Sam didn't hide her bitterness either. Social media posts flaunting new designer handbags, captions about reinvention and big things coming. People in town weren't fooled. At the diner, whispers followed her like shadows. At Romano's, she stopped getting the corner table. At the yoga studio, her membership renewal mysteriously got lost. Entitlement has a way of making itself unwelcome. One evening, I sat in Helen's study papers spread across her desk, her lamp glowing softly. Outside, the garden beds were still bare, waiting for spring. I remembered her voice. A garden doesn't lie. You get out what you put in. That night, I drafted the Foundation's charter mission statement myself. My handwriting was clumsy compared to Helen's neat script, but the words were steady. This foundation exists to carry forward what Helen believed, that love without responsibility is no love at all. It will build where others tear down. It will plant where others neglect. It will stand when others fall. When I signed my name at the bottom, I felt something I hadn't in months: peace. Brad had lost his house. Soon he'd lose his foothold in the company. But me, I was building something permanent. Something that would outlast his mistakes. It didn't take long for Brad to sniff around the foundation. Word had spread in town about the Helen Warren Foundation, its scholarships, its grants, its board. People respected it because it bore Helen's name, and Helen had earned that respect, the way she lived quietly, steadily, with dignity. Brad saw opportunity, not legacy. He showed up at my office one afternoon without an appointment. Linda gave me a warning glance before he pushed through my door, smiling like a man walking into a room he thought he owned. "Dad," he said brightly, "I've been thinking. With the foundation growing, you'll need someone younger on the board, someone with contacts. I can modernize the image, bring in donors, expand outreach." I let him talk his words, spilling fast, polished like a sales pitch. When he finally stopped to breathe, I folded my hands on the desk. The board seats are for those with a proven record of stewardship and responsibility. Right now, Brad, your record speaks for itself. His smile faltered. "That's not fair. You're holding mistakes against me when this is about Mom. She'd want me involved." I met his eyes evenly. "Your mother wanted you at her funeral. You didn't show. That's the record that matters most." The air went heavy between us. For once, he didn't have a comeback. Sam tried a different tactic days later. She caught me outside the hardware store, stepping out of a shiny SUV as if arriving on a red carpet. Her voice was honeyed but sharp beneath. "Frank, you know Brad deserves a place in this. He's your son. If you keep cutting him out, you won't just lose him. You'll lose us. You'll lose family." I shook my head. Family isn't a word you use when you want access to someone else's wallet. Family shows up when it costs something. Her jaw tightened, but her smile never slipped. "You think you can keep us out, but money doesn't stay locked up forever." "Maybe not," I said, walking past her, "but this money isn't yours." When I got home, I sat at Helen's desk, the papers from Diane and Michael neatly stacked. Each transfer, each clause, each notarized seal, everyone was a lock, and I had built a fortress. I remembered Helen's words, scribbled on that index card I'd found in Brad's school box. "We gave him everything we had. I hope he remembers us kindly." I whispered into the quiet room. "He won't remember us kindly, Helen, but he'll remember us clearly." That night, Linda brought over a misdelivered envelope from the office. Inside were Helen's old reading glasses, smudged and worn. I placed them on top of the foundation's charter. Her vision, not Brad's, was what I intended to protect. Brad could scheme, plead, or rage, but the truth was immovable. The foundation bore her name, and her name was not for sale. Brad's desperation finally pushed him into recklessness. He came striding into the office one morning, chin-high voice booming with fake confidence. "Big news, Dad. I've set up an LLC, independent. I'm going to show you I can run something on my own." Linda, sitting outside my office, didn't even look up from her files. She just met my eyes briefly, her lips tightening the way they did when she smelled smoke before anyone else admitted there was fire. I didn't stop him. I didn't question him. I just nodded slowly, as if humoring a child who just announced he was building a rocket in the backyard. "All right, Brad, let's see what you've got." What he had was a flimsy plan to buy into a development lot on the edge of town. He pitched it as prime growth land. What he didn't know, what I made sure he didn't know, was that the lot had zoning restrictions buried deep in the city's records. Anyone without the right permits would bleed cash until the project collapsed. The foundation, however, had those permits lined up through Diane's quiet legal work. I baited the hook by mentioning the parcel at a board meeting loud enough for Brad to overhear in the hallway. "We're reviewing a development opportunity," I said casually. "Might need investors to match our pledge." His eyes lit up like a man spotting a lifeboat. Within 2 weeks, he marched into my office with papers in hand. "I've got my LLC ready. I want in on that deal. This is my chance." I studied the documents carefully, then slid them back. "If you think you're ready, Brad, by all means. Just remember, deals don't forgive mistakes." He signed eagerly, his penmanship sharp, almost aggressive. Sam stood behind him, grinning like she'd already spent the profit. 2 months later, the notices began. Missed payments, cash calls, contractors walking away from half-finished work. Brad scrambled, begging the same clients who once rolled their eyes at his arrogance. Sam's Instagram posts grew quieter, fewer handbags, more cryptic captions about fake people and learning who's real. When Brad stormed into my house one evening, eyes bloodshot, papers crumpled in his fist, he slammed them on my table. "You set me up, that land was poisoned, and you knew it." I poured myself a glass of water, calm as ever. "I didn't set you up, Brad. I let you walk into the same system I've lived by for 40 years. Due diligence. You didn't do it. You wanted me to fail," he shouted, voice cracking. "No," I said evenly. "I wanted you to learn. But failure is the only teacher you've ever respected." His hands trembled. For once, he had no rebuttal. He grabbed the papers, stormed out, and drove off so fast his tires spit gravel against the siding of my house. I stood in the quiet kitchen, Helen's porcelain cup, catching the glow of the evening sun. The light glinted off the faint lipstick ring, a reminder of the life we had built carefully, brick by brick, while Brad kept swinging hammers at his own foundation. By autumn, the rumors had hardened into fact. Brad's LLC was collapsing. Contractors had walked away. Investors wanted out. And then came the call from the bank, a voice too formal to be mistaken for anything but trouble. "Mr. Warren," the officer said, "as guarantor on your son's Maple Ridge loan, you should be aware payments have lapsed 60 days. I leaned back in my chair, staring at Helen's garden through the office window. The beds lay bare soil turned over for winter, honest in their emptiness. "I'm no longer a guarantor," I replied. "You have that in writing." A pause, then foreclosure proceedings will begin. Do what you must. In a town like Cedar Falls, foreclosure isn't just paperwork, it's theater. Word spread quickly. At the diner, whispers floated above the smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee. At the country club, where Brad once strutted through with his Friday foursome, people avoided eye contact, their silence sharper than mockery. Sam's social orbit shrank too. The boutique stopped holding dresses behind the counter for her. The yoga studio misplaced her renewal paperwork. Respect doesn't vanish in a storm. It leaks away drip by drip. The auction was scheduled for a Thursday morning at the courthouse. Frost still clung to the steps when I arrived early, parking across the street. I sat in my truck, hands steady on the wheel, watching the crowd gather. Contractors in work boots, local flippers with eyes like hawks, a few townsfolk who treated other people's ruin as casual entertainment. Brad and Sam arrived late. He wore his best coat, she her fur-collared white one. They stood close, but not touching, as if the chill between them was colder than the air. The county clerk's voice carried across the stone lot, number 42B, commonly known as 317 Maple Ridge. His words reduced their house, the place Helen once planted zinnias out front, to coordinates and bullet points. The first bid came quickly, then another. Brad kept his paddle low, jaw-tight eyes scanning the crowd like he was searching for a miracle. And then Diane's associate stepped forward, her voice crisp and steady. 312. The room shifted. The bids faltered. 317, she added with precision. Going once, going twice, sold. Brad turned, scanning the crowd until his eyes found me through the windshield of my truck. He didn't need words. The truth had already struck his house, his pride, his illusion. It was gone. When the gavel dropped, I exhaled. Not triumph, not revenge, just balance. The house would be transferred to Riverbend Holdings, managed through the foundation. It wouldn't sit empty or rot in bitterness. A family who needed it would move in. As the crowd dispersed, Brad stood frozen at the bottom of the steps, Sam's face hard as glass beside him. For once, no shouting, no bargaining, no excuses. Just silence, the kind that falls when gravity finally finishes its work. 2 weeks after the auction, I signed the final papers in a county clerk's office that smelled of old paper and lemon cleaner. No ceremony, no applause. Just a notary stamp, a few signatures, and the quiet shifting of a house from one set of hands into another. Riverbend Holdings, LLC. Our arm of the foundation now held the deed to Maple Ridge, not as an investment, as a promise. When I drove to the house that afternoon, the driveway was empty, the yard littered with leaves. A for sale sign leaned crooked in the grass, abandoned. I pulled it up and set it flat in the bed of my truck. Inside, the air was stale, but the bones were strong. I walked through each room, slowly touching the walls, listening to the silence. There were faint outlines where Sam's ornate mirrors had once hung ghost rectangles against the paint. I didn't see absence. I saw a canvas. The kitchen counters were still spotless marble, though the cabinets rattled on their hinges. Upstairs, the bedroom carried that peculiar hollowness of a place that's been left too fast, dresser drawers, pulled closet rods bare. I opened a window and let the autumn air sweep through cold but honest. Back at the foundation office, we drew up the renovation plan. Local contractors would be hired, but apprentices from the community college would be paired with them. Carpentry, electrical, plumbing, all supervised, all training the next generation of skilled workers. Exactly what Helen used to say we should support. At the first site meeting, I kept my distance clipboard in hand, while crews ripped out rotted trim and tightened floor joists. Brad showed up one Saturday, not as an owner, not even as an employee, just as a man looking for work. He didn't ask me directly. He asked Hank, the foreman. Hank didn't know he was my son. He just handed him a broom. And so Brad swept. For 6 Saturdays straight, he swept, sawdust, hauled drywall, carried lumber until the calluses on his hands started to look like mine had at his age. He didn't talk much. That was fine. Work has a way of speaking louder than words. By December, the house was nearly ready. Fresh paint along the baseboards, a new porch light wired to click on at dusk stairs that no longer creaked underfoot. It no longer looked like entitlement. It looked like a home. On a cold morning, neighbors gathered for the ribbon cutting. Linda with her clipboard, Michael with his steady nod, Diane with her sharp smile. A local family stood near the porch, the Ramirez's. Their little boy held a sign with the word "Thank you" scrawled in bright colors, each letter a different shade. Their daughter's sign was simpler, home, with the O shaped into a heart. I cut the ribbon and stepped aside. The children ran inside, their voices bouncing down the hallway like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. For the first time since Helen's funeral, the house at Maple Ridge sounded alive again. Standing on that porch, listening to the Ramirez children's laughter spill from rooms once choked with silence, I realized this was what Helen would have wanted. Not bitterness, not vengeance, but balance. Brad had tried to take everything. He believed family meant endless forgiveness, and that love would always write another check. But love without responsibility is no love at all. I didn't disinherit him out of spite. I did it to protect what we built, to ensure that our legacy would stand longer than his mistakes. The Helen Warren Foundation was more than a shield. It became a tool to plant seeds in soil that could actually grow. Watching that family step across the threshold at Maple Ridge proved something I had almost forgotten. Legacies are not about what you leave to someone, but what you leave for others. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: sometimes the hardest word you'll ever say is no. But if you never say it, the people you love may never learn how to stand. And if you are a parent, think about whether you are rescuing your children or quietly robbing them of the lessons that build character. Now I want to ask you, have you ever faced a betrayal in your own family where love and money collided? What did you do, and what did you learn from it? Share your story in the comments. I'd like to hear it. If this story meant something to you, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for listening.